She arrived at the concert hall early in the afternoon carrying a simple cloth bag that held her sheet music, and nothing else about her suggested importance or confidence. The building itself felt larger than her presence with its tall doors, wide marble steps, and quiet staff moving with practiced calm. She paused for a moment at the entrance, taking in the echo of distant tuning instruments and soft footsteps. Her name was Clara, and she had traveled alone by bus from a small town where she taught piano lessons to children and practiced late at night after long days of work. This recital was not meant for people like her. It was known as a showcase for rising stars, conservatory students, and musicians backed by patrons. Yet her former teacher had insisted she apply, and somehow her name had been accepted into the program. She still did not fully understand how it happened, and she felt as though someone might realize the mistake at any moment and ask her to leave. Clara moved quietly through the hallways, keeping her eyes low as others passed her with confident strides. Many wore elegant clothing and spoke openly about competitions and past performances. She heard names of famous teachers and cities she had only seen in books. No one greeted her, and she did not expect them to. Her dress was modest, light gray and carefully pressed, but clearly old-fashioned. Her shoes were clean but worn. She found a small chair near the wall and sat down, placing her bag on her lap. Her hands rested on top, fingers interlaced as she breathed slowly, trying to steady the familiar nervous tension that always came before playing. She thought about her mother, who had saved for years to buy their first upright piano. When Clara was a child, it had been placed near the window of their small living room, and every afternoon Clara would sit there practicing scales while the sounds of the street drifted in. Her mother had listened from the kitchen, never commenting unless Clara asked, and even then she spoke gently. Clara had learned early that music was something private, something you did because it mattered to you, not because anyone was watching. That belief had followed her into adulthood, shaping her quiet way of being. As rehearsal time approached, the other performers began warming up on side pianos, filling the air with confident runs and dramatic chords. Clara stayed still, listening, absorbing the sound without adding her own. She did not want to draw attention, and she knew her strength did not lie in volume or showmanship. Instead, she focused inward, imagining the opening measures of the piece she would play later. That melody had been with her for years, one she returned to whenever life felt heavy. It was simple but deeply expressive, and she trusted it more than she trusted herself. Eventually, a coordinator called the group together, explaining the order of performance and reminding them of timing. Clara listened, carefully memorizing her place. She was scheduled near the end, which brought both relief and dread. Relief because she could listen to others and settle into the space, and dread because waiting always made her thoughts wander. She nodded when spoken to, answered softly when asked, and soon found herself alone again. From her seat, she could see the stage through the open doors. The grand piano sat under warm lights, its polished surface reflecting the empty rows of seats beyond. The hall felt alive even without an audience, as if it remembered every note ever played within its walls. Clara wondered if her own music would belong there. For a moment she doubted it, yet she could not turn back now. As the afternoon passed, performers took turns rehearsing. Some played brilliantly, others struggled, but all carried themselves with a sense of belonging. Clara felt like a visitor watching a world she admired, but never claimed her turn to rehearse was optional, and she declined politely, saying she preferred to play later. No one questioned her choice. When evening approached, the hall began to fill. The audience arrived dressed in fine coats and quiet excitement. The maestro entered shortly after, a respected figure known for his sharp ear and high standards. He greeted several performers by name, praising past achievements. Clara watched from her seat, unseen, unnoticed, and oddly calm. There was comfort in being invisible. No expectations rested on her shoulders. She thought again of her mother and the small piano by the window, and the way music had always been a place of honesty for her, not a performance, but a conversation with herself. She closed her eyes briefly and imagined sitting at that old bench, feeling the keys beneath her fingers. The lights dimmed slightly, signaling the start of the recital. Applause followed the first introduction, and the music began. One by one, performers stepped onto the stage, delivering pieces that drew admiration and polite praise. Clara listened intently, noticing details, the way a phrase breathed, the way silence mattered as much as sound. She did not compare herself, she only listened. As her turn drew closer, she stood slowly, smoothing her dress and adjusting the strap of her bag. Her heart beat steadily, now not fast, not slow, just present. She took a final breath and waited in the shadows, ready to step forward when called, unaware that everything about to follow would change the way she was seen, and perhaps the way she saw herself. If any dots or ellipses appear, rewrite the content. Without them, she remained seated at the piano as the first section ended, and the sound dissolved into the stillness of the hall. Her hands hovered above the brief moment, not because she was uncertain, but because she was listening to the silence that followed. That silence felt different from before, as if it had weight and attention woven into it. Clara breathed in slowly and let her shoulders soften. She had not planned to play for anyone other than herself, and that intention stayed with her. She began the next passage, gently allowing the rhythm to grow from within rather than pushing it forward. The melody moved like a quiet conversation, unfolding one thought at a time. Each phrase felt familiar to her body, as if her hands already knew where to go without instruction. This was the music she played late at night when the world felt heavy, and she needed clarity. Now it lived in a larger space, yet it did not change its nature. The audience listened without shifting in their seats. No one coughed or whispered. Even the subtle sounds of the hall seemed to pause. Clara felt a strange calm settle over her, as though the pressure she had carried into the room had lifted. She was no longer of being seen or judged, she was simply present. Her fingers moved with quiet confidence, shaping the melody with patience. There was restraint in her playing, And also depth. She did not reach for drama, yet emotion surfaced naturally through the careful balance of sound and silence. The music carried longing and resolve without exaggeration. It spoke in a language that did not demand attention yet held it firmly. The maestro watched closely. Now he noticed the way she allowed phrases to breathe, and how she trusted the natural arc of the music. This was not the kind of performance that impressed through speed or force. It impressed through honesty. He felt a tightening in his chest, not from surprise alone, but from recognition. He had spent his life listening for truth in sound, and he heard it now. Clara shifted slightly on the bench, adjusting her posture. As the piece deepened, the melody moved into a lower register, and the tone grew warmer. She leaned into the keys just enough to let the piano respond fully. The instrument seemed to open under her hands, offering colors she had not forced, but invited. It was as if the piano recognized her touch and answered in kind. She remembered moments from her life that shaped this music: long mornings teaching children who struggled with simple scales, quiet evenings caring for her mother when illness made days slow and uncertain. She remembered choosing music over recognition again and again, because it was the only path that felt honest. Those memories did not distract her, they fueled her connection to the sound. The audience began to feel something shift within themselves. They did not analyze what they heard, they felt it. The music stirred memories of their own moments of humility and hope. It reminded them of times when quiet perseverance mattered more than applause. They leaned forward, not consciously, but instinctively. The maestro lowered his hands to his lap. His posture changed from guarded to open. He was no longer evaluating technique or structure. He was listening as a human being. He understood now that this performance did not need validation. It existed fully on its own terms. Clara transitioned into a more complex section with subtle changes in tempo. Her control was precise, yet never rigid. She allowed small fluctuations in timing that gave the music life. It felt conversational, as if the melody were thinking aloud. This quality drew listeners deeper into the experience. Her breathing aligned with the rhythm. She felt grounded, connected to the bench, the keys, the sound. There was no fear left, only focus. She trusted the piece, and it carried her forward. The hall seemed smaller, now more intimate. The distance between stage and audience dissolved. Everyone shared the same moment, the same breath. The lights felt softer, though they had not changed. The atmosphere had transformed through attention alone. The maestro noticed details others might miss: the way she resolved tension without forcing closure, the way she allowed notes to linger just long enough to be felt. These choices revealed maturity, not ambition. They revealed someone who played for meaning rather than effect. Clara reached another turning point in the music. This section held quiet intensity. Her hands moved with strength yet remained controlled. She did not press harder, she pressed deeper. The sound carried weight. Without volume, the audience felt a collective stillness. Some felt emotion rise unexpectedly, others felt clarity or calm. No one remained untouched. The maestro felt his earlier assumptions dissolve. He realized how easily he had overlooked her presence before she played. Her modest appearance, her quiet demeanor had offered no signals of distinction, yet here she was revealing depth that could not be ignored. He felt humbled by the reminder. Clara did not notice the change in him. She did not see the way he leaned forward or the way his eyes followed her hands. She was immersed in the unfolding story of the music. Each phrase led naturally to the next. Her fingers began a gradual ascent toward a brighter register. The shift felt like emerging into light. After reflection, the melody softened and opened. It carried hope without sentimentality. The audience sensed the transition and followed willingly. Their attention did not waver. They trusted her direction. They allowed the music to guide them. The maestro felt a quiet smile form, not of pride or satisfaction, but of recognition. He knew this kind of performance was rare, not because of technical difficulty, but because of emotional clarity. Clara maintained her steady pace. She did not rush toward the ending. She allowed the music to say what it needed to say. She honored its shape. As she approached the final measures of the piece, her hands grew lighter. The sound thinned gently. She let the notes fade naturally. There was no grand gesture, no flourish, only completion. The final note lingered in the air. Clara held her hands in place until the sound fully disappeared. She remained still, listening. The silence that followed was deep and shared. For a moment, no one moved. The audience did not clap immediately. They needed time to return from where the music had taken them. The maestro remained seated, his expression thoughtful and changed. Clara lowered her hands and rested them in her lap. She felt a quiet release within her chest. She had played honestly, and that was enough. Then the applause began, not loud at first, but sincere. It grew steadily, filling the hall. Clara looked up, surprised by the warmth of the response. She stood slowly and bowed once simply. She did not smile broadly or seek approval. She acknowledged the audience and stepped back from the piano. The maestro stood as well. His applause was measured, but full. He knew this moment would stay with him. Clara walked off the stage with the same quiet presence she had carried onto it. Yet something had shifted within the room and within herself. She had not sought to be seen, but she had been heard. Clara stepped into the quiet corridor behind the stage, carrying her bag close to her side. The applause still echoed faintly through the walls, but it already felt distant to her. She walked slowly, as if moving too fast might break the calm she carried inside. Other performers stood nearby, some speaking softly, others watching her with new curiosity. A few offered polite smiles, one nodded in respect. No one spoke to her directly, and she did not mind. She felt lighter than before, as if something heavy had been set down. She found an empty chair near a window and sat. Her hands rested on her knees, warm from playing. She looked at them with a kind of quiet disbelief. They looked the same as they always had, yet they had just spoken in a way she had never allowed before. Her breathing settled into an easy rhythm. She felt tired, but not drained. It was the kind of tired that followed honesty, the kind that came after doing something fully without holding back. She thought again of her mother and wished she could have been there, not for the applause, But for the moment of stillness that came before it, her mother would have understood that part best. The door at the end of the corridor opened, and the maestro stepped through. He walked without urgency, his expression thoughtful. Several people noticed him, and straightened. He nodded briefly to them. But his attention was focused ahead. When he reached Clara, he stopped. She looked up surprised. He did not speak right away. He seemed to search for the right words. Then he thanked her. His voice was calm and sincere. He said her playing reminded him why he first fell in love with music. He said it was rare to hear someone play without trying to prove anything. Clara listened quietly. She did not respond at first. She was not used to praise, especially from someone like him. She told him she only played the way she always had. She said she never learned how to perform any other way. Her voice was steady and honest. The maestro nodded. He said that was exactly what made it powerful. He said many musicians forget how to listen to themselves. He said she had not forgotten. He asked where she had studied. She told him about her small town, her lessons, her years of teaching. She did not embellish. She did not minimize either. She simply spoke the truth. He listened carefully. He did not interrupt when she finished. He said she had something that could not be taught. He said technique could be refined, but sincerity was a gift. Others nearby pretended not to listen, but they heard every word. The atmosphere shifted again, not dramatic, not loud, but real. The maestro asked if she would consider playing again later in the season, not as a guest, but as a featured performer. He said he would like to hear more of her voice. Clara felt a quiet shock move through her. She did not answer right away. She needed a moment to understand what he was asking. She said she would need time to think. She had responsibilities, students, family obligations. Her life was not arranged around opportunity. He respected that. He said music that grew from a life lived honestly always carried more weight. He gave her his card and told her to reach out when she was ready. When he left, the corridor felt different, not because of his absence, but because of what remained. Clara sat quietly again, holding the card between her fingers. Other performers approached her now. Some congratulated her sincerely. Others asked questions about her training, her piece, her background. She answered kindly, but briefly. She did not want to explain too much. Eventually, the hall began to empty. The sounds of footsteps and conversation faded. Clara gathered her things and stepped outside into the cool evening air. The city lights were beginning to glow. Cars moved steadily along the street. Life continued as it always did. She walked toward the bus stop, the same one she had arrived at hours earlier. Nothing about it looked different, yet she felt changed. She sat on the bench and watched people pass. She felt no urgency to leave the moment behind. She allowed it to settle naturally. On the ride home, she looked out the window. The reflection of her face stared back quietly. She did not look triumphant. She looked peaceful. She thought about her students and the lessons she would teach the next day. She thought about how she might tell them to listen more closely, not just to the notes, but to themselves. When she reached her apartment, she unlocked the door and stepped inside. The familiar smell of old wood and sheet music greeted her. She placed her bag down and went to the piano by the window. She did not turn on the light. She sat and placed her hands on the keys. She played softly, not the piece from the recital, but something simpler. The music filled the room gently. It felt like coming home. She understood now that being overlooked had never taken anything from her. It had protected her voice. Until she was ready to share it, she played, until the night grew quiet, not for recognition, not for memory, but because music had always been and would always be where she told the truth. If any dots or ellipses appear, rewrite the content without them. Morning arrived gently through the thin curtains of Clara's apartment, and the light rested across the piano keys like a quiet reminder of the night before she woke. Earlier than usual, not from urgency, but from a sense of awareness that felt new and steady. For a moment, she lay still, listening to the distant sounds of the city beginning its day, and she noticed how calm her thoughts were. She rose and prepared tea, moving slowly through familiar motions. Nothing in the room had changed, yet everything felt slightly different, as if the air carried more space. She sat at the small table holding the warm cup and allowed her thoughts to drift back to the recital, not to the applause or the words spoken afterward, but to the feeling of being fully present. She wondered how many times in her life she had held herself back, not out of fear, but out of habit. Being modest had always felt safer. It had allowed her to exist without friction, without expectation. Yet she realized now that modesty did not have to mean invisibility. Later that morning, she walked to the local school where she taught piano lessons. The building was old, with narrow halls and scuffed floors, and it smelled faintly of and dust. Children arrived one by one, carrying books and bags, laughing loudly and filling the space with energy. Clara greeted them as she always did, with a calm smile and gentle voice. She sat beside her first student, a young boy who struggled with focus and often rushed through his playing. She listened carefully as he played and noticed the tension in his shoulders. Instead of correcting his notes right away, she asked him to pause and listen to his own breathing. He looked confused at first, then curious. She guided him slowly, and the change was subtle but real. As the day continued, Clara found herself teaching differently, not with new techniques, but with a deeper patience. She encouraged listening over performance and intention over speed. She noticed how the students responded to this shift, becoming more attentive, more engaged. During a short break, she stepped outside into the courtyard and checked her phone. There was a message from an unfamiliar number. It was from one of the coordinators from the recital, thanking her again and sharing that several audience members had asked about her. Clara read the message once, then put the phone away. She did not feel the rush of excitement she might have expected. Instead, she felt grounded, as if the attention was something passing through her life, rather than defining it. That evening, she visited her mother, who lived nearby in a small care apartment. Her mother was resting in a chair by the window, wrapped in a light blanket. When she saw Clara, her face brightened. Clara sat beside her and held her. They spoke about simple things: the weather, the children at school, a neighbor who had baked bread. Then her mother asked gently about the recital. Clara described the hall, the piano, the quiet moment before playing. She did not mention the maestro or the invitation. She focused on the music. And how it felt to play it. Her mother listened closely, nodding slowly. When Clara finished, her mother squeezed her hand and said she had always known that Clara played from a place of truth. She said that being seen was no goal, but being honest always was. Those words stayed with Clara. As she walked home later under the evening sky, she felt a sense of alignment between who she had always been and who she was becoming. There was no conflict between the two, only growth. Over the following days, small changes continued to appear. A former student reached out expressing interest in returning to lessons. A local music group asked if she would consider joining their rehearsals. Each invitation felt like a door opening gently rather than being forced. Clara did not accept everything. She took time to consider what felt right. She learned to say yes without apology and no without guilt. One afternoon, she sat at the piano preparing a new piece. She noticed how her approach had shifted. She no longer practiced to perfect every passage, but to understand what the music was asking of her. She allowed mistakes to guide her rather than discourage her. She listened for meaning rather than approval. Weeks passed, and the memory of the recital settled into something quieter but lasting. It no longer felt like a turning point, but like a confirmation, a reminder that she did not need to change who she was to be. Heard one evening, she took out the card the maestro had given her. She held it for a long moment, then placed it on the piano. She was not ready to call yet, but she knew she would be. She understood now that opportunity did not require her to abandon her life. It asked her to bring her life with her into the music. As night fell, she played softly, letting the notes move freely through the room. There was no audience, no expectation, only presence in that quiet space. Clara felt whole. She was no longer overlooked. Even when no one was watching, she had learned to stand fully within her own voice. The days continued to move forward with a gentle rhythm, and Clara allowed herself to move with them rather than ahead of them. She noticed how her awareness had sharpened, not in a dramatic way, but in small, steady moments. She listened more carefully when others spoke, and she listened even more carefully when she played at the school. Her students began to change in subtle ways. They played with less tension and more curiosity. They asked questions not about how fast they should play, but about how the music should feel. Clara guided them patiently, helping them understand that music was not a test to pass, but a language to speak. One afternoon after lessons, a colleague approached her in the hallway. He had attended the recital and told her he had never heard the hall so quiet. He said it was the kind of silence that meant people were truly listening. Clara thanked him simply and returned to packing her bag. That evening, she received another message, this time from a small regional orchestra. They had heard about her performance through someone who had been in the audience. They asked if she would consider meeting with them to discuss a possible collaboration. The message was respectful and without pressure. Clara read it carefully, then set her phone aside. She sat at the piano and placed her hands on the keys. Without playing, she thought about what collaboration meant to her. It was not about visibility or recognition. It was about whether the music could remain honest within a larger space. She decided to meet them, not to commit, but to listen. A few days later, she traveled to the rehearsal hall. It was modest and practical, filled with music stands and worn chairs. The musicians greeted her warmly without ceremony. They spoke about repertoire and process. They asked how she approached music and what mattered to her when she played. Clara spoke openly about listening and restraint and allowing music to unfold naturally. She noticed how carefully they listened. In return, when they invited her to play, she chose a short piece she knew well. She played as she always did, without explanation. The room responded with the same attentive quiet she had felt at the recital. Afterward, they did not rush to speak. One of them said simply that her playing made space for others. Another said it felt like a conversation rather than a performance. Clara felt understood. She left the hall with no contract, no plan, only a sense of possibility that felt grounded rather than overwhelming. She realized that the path opening before her did not require become someone else. It invited her to bring her way of being into new settings. At home, her routine remained steady. She cooked simple meals, cared for her mother, and prepared lessons. The difference lay in how she held herself within those routines. She no longer felt small within them. One evening, her mother asked her to play. Clara sat at the piano and chose a piece her mother loved. As she played, she noticed how her mother listened with her eyes closed, breathing slowly. In that moment, Clara understood that this kind of listening was what she had always played for. Later that night, she wrote in a small notebook she kept near the piano. She did not write goals or plans. She wrote reflections about sound, silence, and presence. She wrote about how music felt when it was shared without expectation. Over the following weeks, she accepted the invitation to work with the orchestra on a limited basis. They agreed to a small number of rehearsals and a performance that felt manageable. Clara appreciated their willingness to collaboration around mutual respect. During rehearsals, she played attentively, adjusting to the collective sound. She listened as much as she played. The musicians responded to her cues. Even when they were subtle, they trusted the quiet spaces. She left. The conductor noticed how the ensemble breathed together. When Clara played, he remarked that the music felt more balanced, more human. Clara felt grateful for the shared effort outside of rehearsals. She continued teaching and living as she always had. Some days were tiring and unremarkable. Others carried moments of quiet satisfaction. She learned that growth did not always announce itself. The night of the orchestra performance arrived without fanfare. The hall was smaller than the recital hall, but filled with attentive listeners. Clara walked onto the stage with the same calm she had felt before she took her seat and waited. As she played, she felt the support of the ensemble around her. The music moved as a shared expression rather than a display. She felt present and steady. When the performance ended, the applause was warm, and genuine, Clara acknowledged it briefly and stepped back. She did not carry it with her in the days that followed. She reflected on how far she had come without feeling as though she had traveled far at all. She realized that being overlooked had once allowed her to grow quietly. Now being seen did not diminish that growth. She understood that her voice had always been there, waiting not for permission, but for readiness, and now that it was heard, she chose carefully when and how to share it. Her life remained simple, but it was no longer small. As the weeks turned into months, Clara noticed a deeper change taking shape within her, not in her schedule or reputation, but in her sense of direction. She no longer felt pulled by the idea of proving herself or staying hidden. Instead, she felt guided by a quiet clarity that helped her choose what mattered and let go of what did not. Her collaboration with the orchestra continued at a gentle pace. They met regularly, but without pressure. Rehearsals felt like shared exploration rather than obligation. Clara appreciated how the musicians listened to one another, and how space was valued as much as sound. During one rehearsal, the conductor paused and asked the ensemble to begin again more slowly. He said the music needed room to breathe. Clara recognized the language immediately and felt a sense of alignment. This was the kind of environment where her voice could exist naturally. Outside the rehearsal hall, her daily life remained grounded. She still walked the same streets, shopped at the same market, and greeted the same neighbors, yet she felt more present in these moments. She noticed small details: the rhythm of footsteps, the tone of voices, the pauses between words. At the school, her students continued to grow. Some advanced quickly, others moved slowly, but all began to listen differently. One student who had once struggled to sit still now played with patience and care. Clara realized that the way she approached music was shaping more than sound. It was shaping attention. One afternoon, a parent approached her after a lesson. She said her child had begun playing at home without being asked, not to practice, but to explore. Clara felt a quiet joy hearing this. It confirmed what she had always believed about music as a place of curiosity rather than pressure. As her presence in the music community became more visible, Clara received more invitations. Some were thoughtful and respectful, others were driven by trends and expectations. She learned to tell the difference quickly. When an offer felt misaligned, she declined politely. She did not explain herself. She trusted her instincts. This was new for her, and it felt steady rather than anxious. One evening, she attended a small gathering of musicians and listeners. The atmosphere was informal and warm. People spoke openly about their struggles and inspirations. Clara shared parts of her journey, not as a story of success, but as a process of listening. Someone asked her if she regretted staying in the background for so long. She considered the question carefully. She said she did not regret it. She said those years had taught her how to hear herself clearly. Without them, her voice might have been louder, but not truer. That answer stayed with her long after the gathering ended. She realized that every phase of her life had prepared her for the next. Nothing had been wasted at home. She continued to write in her notebook. Her reflections grew deeper and more personal. She wrote about fear and patience, about the difference between ambition and intention. She did not plan to share these writings. They were a way of listening inward. Her mother remained a steady presence. Though her health fluctuated, her spirit stayed calm. They spent quiet evenings together, sometimes speaking, sometimes simply sharing silence. Clara played often, and her mother listened with the same attentiveness she always had. One night, her mother said she was proud of her, not for being recognized, but for staying herself. Clara felt emotion rise, but she did not speak right away. She held her mother's hand and let the moment settle. As the orchestra prepared for another performance, Clara felt a familiar calm. The nerves that once accompanied public playing had softened. They were replaced by focus and trust. She knew now that she did not carry the music alone. It moved through her and beyond her. During the performance, she noticed how the ensemble responded to subtle shifts. They followed her phrasing, and she followed theirs. The music felt alive and responsive. It was no longer about a single voice, but about connection. Afterwards, several people approached her. Some thanked her for the performance. Others spoke about how the music had made them feel. Clara listened fully, without rushing the conversation. She understood that this exchange was part of the music too. As she walked home that night, she felt a sense of balance. Her life held both stillness and movement. She no longer felt divided between her private world and the public one. They had begun to inform each other. Naturally, she thought about the future, not with plans, but with openness. She knew there would be challenges and uncertainty, but she also knew how to listen. The path ahead did not feel like a climb. It felt like a continuation. She would keep playing, teaching, learning, and choosing with care, not because she was finally seen, but because she was fully present within her own voice. Time continued to move in a way that felt both ordinary and meaningful to Clara, and she no longer tried to separate the two. She understood now that significance did not arrive as a single moment, but as a pattern formed over time through attention and care. Her days found a steady balance between teaching, rehearsing, and quiet personal practice. She no longer felt torn between these roles. Each one fed the other in ways she could finally recognize. At the school, she noticed how her presence alone had begun to change the atmosphere. Students entered the room with more focus. They spoke less about mistakes and more about curiosity. Music had become a shared exploration rather than a task. One afternoon, a new student arrived, a teenage girl who barely spoke and avoided eye contact. Her playing was technically strong, but emotionally distant. Clara listened without interruption, then asked her to play again more slowly. She asked her to imagine the music as a voice, rather than a test. The girl hesitated, then tried again. Something softened, not perfectly, but honestly. Afterward, she looked up, surprised at herself. Clara said nothing dramatic. She simply nodded. She knew moments like this mattered more than praise. Beyond the classroom, Clara was invited to participate in a small recording project. It was not a major production. It involved a few musicians, a quiet studio, and a focus on interpretation rather than polish she accepted, because the intention felt right. The sessions were unhurried. There were pauses for discussion and reflection, sometimes silence, lasted longer than sound. No one rushed to fill it. Clara felt at home in that space. She played, thoughtfully listening back and adjusting, not to impress, but to clarify. The recording captured something close to her natural voice. She was grateful for that. As word of her work spread, it did so quietly. There were no sudden headlines or dramatic attention. Instead, people who valued depth found their way to her. They listened before they spoke. One evening, she received a letter handwritten from an older listener. The person wrote about attending the recital months earlier. They described how the music had stayed with them during a difficult time. They thanked her for reminding them of patience. Clara read the letter slowly. She felt no pride, only connection. She placed it in her notebook. Among her reflections, her mother continued to grow weaker physically, but remained clear in spirit. They spent more time together, often in silence. Clara played softly, while her mother rested. Sometimes her mother hummed along, barely audible. One afternoon, her mother asked her if she was happy. The question was simple and sincere. Clara thought for a moment, then answered yes, not because everything was easy, but because everything felt aligned. Her mother smiled. She said that was all she had ever hoped for. As winter approached, Clara prepared for another performance with the orchestra. This one felt different, not more important, but more integrated. She was no longer stepping into a separate role. She was bringing her whole self, as she always had during rehearsals. The ensemble worked closely. They listened deeply, adjusted carefully, respected one another. The music felt grounded and alive. On the night of the performance, the hall filled with attentive listeners. Clara walked onto the stage with a familiar calm. She took her seat and waited. As she played, she felt the collective presence around her. The music unfolded naturally, shaped by shared listening. There was no strain, no urgency in the audience. The maestro sat quietly. He listened not as a figure of authority, but as a fellow listener. He recognized the consistency in her voice. It had not changed to meet expectation. It had deepened through patience. When the final note faded, the silence that followed felt complete. Applause came later, warm and respectful. Clara acknowledged it simply. After the performance, she did not linger. She gathered her things and stepped outside into the cold air. She walked slowly, letting the night settle around her. She thought about how once being overlooked had felt like a limitation. Now she understood it had been a season of preparation, a time when she learned to listen without distraction. She no longer needed to be discovered. She had discovered herself. As she returned home, she felt no need to mark the moment, no need to capture it or explain it. It was enough to live it. Her life continued without sharp turns or sudden transformations. Yet everything within it felt intentional. Her music, her teaching, her relationships all flowed from the same source. She knew there would be future challenges and moments of doubt, but she trusted her ability to listen and respond. The world no longer felt like something she needed to enter or escape. She was already part of it, fully present. And as she sat once more at the piano in her quiet apartment, she played with the same honesty that had always guided her, not for recognition, not for memory, but because this was how she remained true to herself. Clara reached a stage in her life where nothing felt unfinished. Even though nothing felt complete, she understood that completion was not a final state, but a way of moving through each day with attention and care. Her routine remained simple and steady. She taught her students with patience. She practiced. When the house was quiet, she cared for her mother, whose strength faded slowly but peacefully. There was no rush in these days, only presence. One early morning, Clara sat by the window watching light move across the buildings outside. She thought about the years when she had believed that being unseen meant being unimportant. That belief no longer held power over her. She saw now that being unseen had given her time to grow without distortion. Her mother passed away quietly not long after winter ended. There was sadness, but no chaos. Clara sat beside her, holding her hand and playing softly until the final moment. It felt like a closing circle rather than an ending. In the weeks that followed, Clara grieved in her own way. She did not withdraw from music. She leaned into it. She played not to escape loss, but to sit with it. Those sounds carried memory, love, and acceptance. They reminded her that music had always been her way of staying connected, even when words failed. At the small memorial service, Clara played one piece. It was simple and unadorned. People listened without expectation. Some cried softly, others sat still. The music held them together without asking anything in return. After that day, Clara returned home and opened her notebook. She wrote about how love does not disappear. It changes form. It becomes quieter, but deeper. As spring unfolded, Clara felt a renewed sense of grounding. She did not feel the need to expand her career or withdraw from it. She allowed it to exist naturally. Invitations came, and she accepted only those that felt honest. One invitation stood out. A small hall in her hometown asked her to perform and speak to young musicians. She agreed without hesitation. It felt like a return rather than a step forward. The hall was modest and familiar. Some faces in the audience had known her since childhood. Others were new. She sat at the piano and played the same way she always had. Afterward, she spoke briefly. She told them that music was not about being impressive. It was about listening deeply. She said that if they learned how to listen, they would never feel lost. A young girl approached her afterward and said she was afraid of being overlooked. Clara smiled gently and said that sometimes being overlooked gives you time to become yourself. That moment stayed with her in the months that followed. Clara continued to live as she always had. Her life did not become larger, it became clearer. She realized that the maestro had been stunned not because she surprised him, but because she reminded him of something essential. The same was true for others who listened. Clara no longer carried the story of being ignored. She carried the story of being rooted. One evening, she sat alone at the piano in her apartment. The window was open, and the sounds of the city moved gently through the room. She placed her hands on the keys and waited. She did not think about the past or the future. She did not think about who might hear her. She played because playing was how she stayed aligned with herself. The melody was quiet and steady. It held no drama, only truth. And in that moment, Clara understood fully. She had never been overlooked by life. She had been guided patiently toward her own voice. That voice now moved freely through her hands into the world, not demanding attention, not seeking approval, simply existing with honesty. Her story did not end with recognition. It continued with presence. And that wasn't.